All right. Well, hello, everyone. I am Billy Dees. Welcome to the podcast. I'm absolutely thrilled that you are here. We are live today on numerous platforms. We are live on Twitter. We are live on YouTube and we are live on Facebook. Twitter is kind of where we're centering the broadcast. So live on Twitter at Billy Dees. And then, of course, you can check out the regular podcast, audio only on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, on down the line, iHeartRadio, all those. Sometime later this evening, we'll have the standard podcast available for you. With me today is my guest co-host, as he often is, Jack Casey. What is going on, Jack?
Not much, man. Just thrilled to be here as well.
Awesome.
So,
No, another. I have another imitator. Okay, very good. That's fine.
and back when
Uh,
I used to do the old podcast, I'd do a Billy Dees impression every now and then. It wasn't
oh,
very
really?
good though, so
Oh, that's okay. I also wanted to point out, even though we're live on all these platforms, because we're live on all these platforms, we can't always interact with everyone, but we will try to go back. Jack, if you want to kind of keep an eye on Twitter, you can certainly do that. And also, too, you can check out if you happen to miss part of this, you can always come back. It'll be here on Twitter, it'll be on YouTube. And of course, we'll have the standard podcast, as I already mentioned, up and available. One of the things we wanted to talk about today, and I know it's going to be a topic that is well covered, but by the same token, it's one of those subjects you really can't ignore it. And that is the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. And I do not know where time goes. I can't believe that it has been 20 years. Jack, any comment on that? Now, you were in high school when that happened. Is that correct?
I was a junior in high school. Just starting a couple weeks after we started in 11th grade, and I was in English class when the second plane hit because the first plane hit and everybody was thinking, it was some kind of accident or something like
Yeah.
that. So my teacher turned on the news, and this is like right after school started putting cable like in all the news or in all the classrooms. And so my neighbor or my teacher turned on CNN, and not even like 30 seconds after she turned it on, the second plane hit,
Yeah.
and everybody was just quiet. There was no
Sure.
screaming. There was nothing, just in disbelief of what we were watching. Um, and it was so the entire day pretty much there was no one was paying attention or teaching anything in class. Like in band, we just sat around and talked with each
Yeah.
other, trying to figure out, if we had any family or anybody who was in danger. I had an uncle, or still have an uncle, who lived in DC at the time, and we were all worried that maybe he was on the subway or something happened like with the Pentagon or whatever. Like, but he phoned in a few hours later, called everyone to tell them, that he was okay, which was
Yeah.
good. But it was a very bizarre day. It was also the second day that I'd worked at Dairy Queen up in Ashtabula, where I'm from. And it was
Yeah.
my last day because they fired me without telling me after that, just didn't put me on the schedule after not training me. But I remember like they were playing it over and over again on the TV. And when I rode my bike home, back in the day, the gas prices were around $1 a gallon, something
Yeah.
like that. Like, it kind of fluctuated no matter where you lived, but all of them had shot up to like $3 a gallon, and there were cars lined up around the block of every gas station on my
Oh,
bike ride home, as people were panicking, not knowing like if fuel was going to get cut off or any of that.
yeah. Yeah.
And the other thing that really struck me was the days after, and I really remember this because we had the Cleveland airport, and then we also had like some military aircraft that would fly over because the place out in Toledo, not
Hmm.
seeing a single plane or contrail in the sky
Yeah.
for 3 or 4 days afterwards. So you got to kind of see
Yep.
what the sky looked like back in the early 1900s for about 3 days in the new century. It was
Yeah.
very bizarre.
I remember that as well. And I was coming home that morning, and it's interesting. I was dating this girl, and just by I don't know chance, we broke up that morning. Okay, and it was coming
Really?
on. We had discussed it the days preceding, and it's And that morning, you know what? We decided that we were going to part as friends. And we also made an agreement that we wouldn't be calling and sniping each other and all these other things like you often do after a breakup. And
Right.
I agreed totally. So I actually went directly to work from her house that morning and I had the radio on. And the radio said, "We're getting reports of an accident in New York where apparently a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center."
Yeah, crazy looking back now that they thought it was an accident for about like
Yeah,
15 minutes and then
yeah,
it wasn't
and
an accident anymore.
well, New York has a history of that. A plane hit the Empire State Building years ago,
Hmm.
and there's been some other minor ones, mostly private planes of smaller types. So when I first heard that a plane hit the World Trade Center, I was like, "Oh well, that sounds bad," but I can't imagine that a jetliner would be that far off course.
Right.
And I had stopped at a coffee shop, and I asked the people at the counter. I said, "Do you guys have a TV on or something? I'm hearing. I heard something on the radio that a plane had crashed into the World Trade Center." And these people at this coffee shop, I still remember they were clueless. They didn't know they didn't know anything. So I got to work, and in the front main entrance to where I worked at the time, there was TVs there, and everybody was in the front. And I had just arrived after the second plane hit. And everybody was saying, though, well, we know now that it was a terrorist attack because it has to be deliberate. I guess whatever doubt there was with the first hit was removed completely with the second crash. And yeah, the announcer started talking about terrorism and all these things, and I picked up the phone and I called what was then my ex-girlfriend, and I said, "Hey, look, I know we agreed not to call each other, but I really think you should turn on the TV." you know.
Right.
So she did, and I said, "Okay, I just got to let you know. I don't know what's going on here, but something really bad's happening in the country." And it wasn't long after that that the plane hit the Pentagon. And then I remember everybody, and not that what happened in New York was bad enough, but after Washington got hit, everybody started wondering, okay, is this going to go on all day, all
Right.
around the country? That was like, what's going to happen next? And it was a very tense moment. I called my mom, and I remember the cell lines were very tied up, and of course they weren't near as sophisticated as they are today. And they were being, obviously overloaded with everybody calling, saying, "Hey, look at the TV" or whatever.
Right.
So it was a very, yeah. It was a day that I wasn't particularly panicked or frantic or anything like that.
See, I wasn't either. Because
Yeah,
I mean, I
for
guess it
some
was just
reason I
so
don't know
far
why.
away from, Ohio
Yeah,
and all that and there's really nothing in Ohio that a terrorist would really go for, at least back
yeah,
then.
sure.
Um, so I mean, a lot of other people were. I mean, a lot of people were crying and all that. I don't know. I guess I'm just kind of dead inside. It didn't really do that much to me, but
I'm not sure that I really. My recollection of that is I was so preoccupied with what is going to happen next, and they always had those
right,
news flashes. They have this thing, breaking news or whatever, and every time you heard one of those, it was like, oh no, something's happening again. And I was preoccupied with what was going to happen next. And I was kind of concerned for people around the country that I knew. I had some friends in Washington. I had a couple in New York, but none that would have been close to it.
right,
And so I was concerned. I believe for me, the concern was more in the days that followed. What was going to happen next? Where was it going to happen? And then, of course, everybody speculates about all kinds of different terror attacks, whether it be another. The planes at that time weren't flying, but everybody was speculating about some sort of a biological attack, some
I
sort of
remember
a dirty bomb.
suitcase dirty bombs. Yeah, were a big
Yeah, the
thing.
dirty bombs. Yeah, and
Anthrax.
the anthrax envelopes were going around.
Hmm.
So it was one of those things where in the days that followed, I believe my concern was higher. But in the day that it was happening, there was so much happening so quickly that at least in my case anyway, I was so busy processing the minute to minute events that I really didn't feel afraid necessarily. But you mentioned a good point, and I want to touch on that because you're talking about it being so far away.
Hmm.
For the most part, this is something that I want to point out. As bad as 9/11 was, and it was very bad, for the most part, a lot of the I want to say attitudes in the public, both on the left and the right, and this isn't a political show. I don't have, or I should say, we talk about politics, but this isn't a partisan rant type place. This isn't what we do here. The extreme right and left are so concerned about their rights and their right to spit on the sidewalk and all these other things. When you consider what happened in Afghanistan, when people were holding on to airplanes rather than stay there, the desperation that a lot of women were feeling about what they're going to be treated like in the coming weeks and months, whether it be brought into some sort of sex slave or some subservient position. And you talk about human rights in that region, the chopping off of the limbs and the executions for different kinds of lifestyles. The reason that I'm bringing this up is, for the most part, the United States has had it very easy in comparison with other countries of the world. I mean, I would ask anybody who lives in this country and who has lived here any length of time, have you ever worried about your child stepping on a landmine on the way to school? Have you ever said something bad about the president and come home and your family is gone? Okay.
Well, with the
Uh,
landmine thing, I think it's fair to say that there are some parts of the cities in this country where, I mean, a legitimate fear is your kid catching a stray bullet from a
oh,
gang shooting
absolutely.
or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. And that's inflicted by the citizenry.
Right.
That isn't brought upon by the government. It's not a matter of state policy. But I could go on here. Whether it's have we had in the past several generations, going back 100 years now, Pearl Harbor is an exception, but for the most part, on the mainland, we haven't had battles here. We haven't had air raids. We haven't had missiles flying over our cities, wondering where they were going to land. And these are all things that, like I said, are through most of the world, uh, whether it be wars, terrorism, all these other things. The United States has had it pretty well. We take the security that we have here for granted. And 9/11, it should have been, I hope it is, some sort of a wake up call that those things that are happening here, we always, that's what's happening on the news. That's what somebody's protesting about. It's not some, I gotta get to the store. I gotta check my Facebook page. For the most part, those things have been something that America presumes, the people in America presume, is going to happen somewhere else. And I don't know. I don't really. I'm not sure that a lot of Americans have an appreciation for the fact that it could come here. Yeah, it could come here and be much more part of our daily life than we ever imagined. And then I don't mean any particular group, but anything. Anything could come our way. And we can't talk about 9/11 without, or at least I can't, without acknowledging the service that so many of our armed forces have done. So many people that maintain our security every day. And it's just not a matter of boots on the ground somewhere else on the other side of the world, but it's the people that monitor our airspace. The airspace now is a completely different ballgame than what it was in 20 years ago.
Oh, you remember when you get off an airplane and like your
Mhm.
family could follow you at the gate? I meant get on
Oh
an
yeah.
airplane and
Oh yeah.
family
We
could
took
follow
it
you
for
to the
granted.
gate. Yeah.
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 I remember when I was a kid, like not really going through security lines for the most part. I mean, they had a metal detector, but you just pretty much walked on through. There was nothing. There's no pat downs. There's no X-rays. None of that stuff.
No.
Because my family, my grandparents lived in Florida. They moved down there when I was like 4 or 5. So we flew down there once or twice a year.
Yeah.
And after 9/11, man, flying got miserable.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that. And I got the bags under my eyes because I'm kind of an insomniac. So of course I get pulled into every time I
Yeah.
fly. I get pulled aside, and they have to pat me down and make sure I'm not gonna blow up an airplane or
Mhm.
smuggle drugs or whatever. But
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
it's
well, what I was getting into with our service people, when a plane goes adrift now and it's not answering back, there's fighters in the air.
yep.
I mean, they're ready. And prior to 9/11, the idea that we would have to police our own airspace was almost that's never going to happen.
Well,
That's
prior to 9/11 too, hijackers who would take over a plane always demanded a ransom or demanded to
yes,
be dropped off in some other country or
that's
something. Like they
true.
weren't
Sure.
trying to die, but once the suicide bombing thing happened, like all the procedures with dealing with something like that changed completely.
Yeah. And President Kennedy once very, I guess it was a very ominous statement. He made the comment one time that if somebody is willing to trade their life for yours, there's only so much you can do to stop them.
Right.
And that was something new. The idea that people would take a plane and not want to make money. They didn't want other people released from prison. They didn't want something in exchange for it. They were just hell bent on destruction. That was something new. And I would have to say that was frightening to a lot of Americans. I mean, how do you reason with that? How do you combat that, so to speak?
Well, I
It
mean, if
was,
you look at mass shooters and all that
oh,
too,
sure.
I
Yeah,
mean, a
absolutely.
lot of people say, well, if we ban all the guns, it won't happen. Well, unfortunately, psychos will find a way to be psychos. And I mean, there
Yeah.
have been knife attacks out in China that have killed 50, 60 people. And,
Yeah.
you can just buy fertilizer and blow something up. I mean, like Timothy McVeigh did.
Yep.
I mean, human behavior is unpredictable. And unfortunately, with how the news and how government tries to handle these things, they try to assume in this, the structure of the legislation or in the reporting that humans are predictable, or someone should have said something about the guy who was rocking back and forth with the gun in his hand on YouTube before he went and shot up the school or whatever. You can't really do that. There's
Yeah.
no predicting when people are going to snap and go out and
Yeah,
do what they do.
that's something that I've, as a private individual, not professionally, but I've checked into, done some research on. You'll have both reactions. A lot of times when somebody does something horrific, a lot of people say, "Well, this day was coming because this guy's been, off of his rocker for how long?" And then you get
Right.
the other reaction. You get the other reaction from other ones that say, "Hey, this guy lived a normal life, went to work every day,
He
said
picked
hi to his
kittens.
neighbors, and there was just no reason to expect that he was ever going to do something like that." So, yeah, I don't want to get into the religious side of this, the motivations for that. But I will say this, to my recollection, Bush and the administration was very careful not to send out a blanket of blame towards the Muslim community. And unfortunately, some of that did happen in the public.
Yeah, one of the
Um,
first people who was attacked after 9/11 in New York City and killed, unfortunately, was a business owner who was a sheik who wasn't even a Muslim.
yeah.
And sheiks are technically Christians. Um, so that was interesting how people kind of said, "Oh, well, he looks like a Muslim, so let's take him down."
Yeah.
And it's happened every time there's been any type of terrorist attack, or like out in England when that one happened.
Yeah.
Same thing
Sure.
happened. People went after the either sheiks or other business owners. It's
Well,
unfortunate.
Well, I gotta tell you too, it's not a lot of times that can be traced to some sort of, let's say Islamophobia.
Right?
In some cases, it can be traced to racism because an attacking group will be of a different race, but it's not always.
No.
I can tell you, the German population here in the United States, they weren't advertising the fact that they were German during World
No.
War II. As a matter of fact, here's a bit of local trivia for you. I'm in Northeast Ohio, and there's a city in Northeast Ohio called North Canton. And the only reason that I say they could have got more creative with renaming their town, it's a city north of Canton, which is where the Professional Football Hall of Fame is. And if you're not from this area, your temptation is to say, well, that's the northern part of Canton. No, it's a completely different city, completely different municipality. It's got its own mayor, its own police force, and so on.
You know, it's funny. I didn't know that until I had to work at a store in North Canton. And I
Oh,
was like,
really?
so this is the northern area of Canton, huh? And they're like, no, we're
No, it's
our
not.
own.
But but here's a piece of trivia about this area. That was Little Berlin or New Berlin, I believe it was. One of those two.
Really?
And yeah, and then when the world wars broke out, they said, you know what? Maybe we should come up with a different name. And like I said, they should have been more creative than to come up with that's like a city north of New York. Let's call it north of New York. So North New York.
Yeah, it turns out
So
New Islamabad wasn't working out for us. So, you
yeah.
know, uh,
So a lot of people of German ancestry were Americanizing their names during that time. Because of the fact that there was, this hatred towards Germany. And of course, you got to keep in mind that was the second time around in World War II. Um, yeah, a lot of that from this history is from World War One that I'm speaking about in this area. So, um,
Germans were fortunate too that they were, white. I mean, look at the Japanese after World War II. I mean, they couldn't exactly change their name to Mr. Smith and then blend in, which is also
yeah,
unfortunate.
yeah. The only thing I would say about that is it's kind of a misnomer that Germany got off easy because they were pummeled with conventional weapons from both the Allies and Russia to the point where they were in the Stone Age.
Right.
As a matter of fact, by the 1970s or so, there wasn't a whole lot of destruction done to Japan itself. There was some bombing there. But for
Hmm.
the most part, Japan, its infrastructure and so forth stayed pretty well intact. And by the 70s or so, they were an economic powerhouse, both in electronics and with automobiles. Germany at that time was still rebuilding.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realize that Germany itself really didn't get put back together at least until the 1980s, and then some would say fully functional through the 1990s. So, I mean, this was a country that was just flattened.
Oh.
And what happened with the Red Army, the rapes and the way they treated women,
Hmm.
and a lot of those women had nothing to do with Nazism. They were young girls. They didn't know anything except their school. Okay. So Germany didn't get off easy by any stretch of the imagination. And Germany is still heavily restricted. Some would say that the real purpose of NATO that was threefold, and that was one, to keep Russia out, keep the United States in, number two, and keep Germany down, number three. That was what
Yep.
Europe wanted. We don't want Germany rising again. So
Those
yeah,
problem neighbors like my one across the street, you let them get away with an inch and they take a mile. So
yeah,
keep them down.
yeah. So yeah, World War II and the way German Americans and of course the internment camps here for the Japanese Americans was an absolute disgrace.
Hmm.
Even my father, who was a World War II veteran, he had some Japanese friends, and he had to help them find their families when they got back.
Yeah.
Just absolute. Not that they were gone; they were findable. But the idea was they were uprooted from their homes, and what a terrible thing. From 9/11, we had the same thing. With radical terrorism, which really you can. I'm not a big religious defender by any stretch of the imagination, no matter what religion it is. But to pigeonhole any race, any pigeonhole any religion, any pigeonhole any culture as to being the blame for
Right.
the radicals is something that we should guard against. I mean, we've done it enough times. This whole discussion, we've talked about what happened, with Muslim population in the wake of 9/11. We talked about Germans. We talked about the Japanese and how they were treated. We've had a long history of doing this, and the danger is too. Not only is it wrong to treat people that way, but a lot of times you can look past the very person because the person who's going to do something in this country is going to make sure they blend in. Okay. Terrorists have a way of being very stealth. So while you're gearing yourself up with a lot of hatred towards the group A because you believe that they're the group that's responsible, group B that you never considered is going to come in and do something to you.
Right.
So stereotyping any large mass of people based upon the reaction of radicals within that group is a
Well,
very
interestingly
unsafe
too,
thing to do. Sure, all the way around. Sure.
um, it wasn't really even that much of a religious motivation. The attacks in 9/11. It was funded by the Saudis, I think, to disrupt America's economy,
Yeah.
which they succeeded. I
Yeah,
mean,
they
you can't
did.
say they didn't win on that one.
Yeah.
But really, religion took a backseat on that one. I mean, sure, Osama bin Laden went on and was like, "Yeah, death to the American infidels" or whatever. But I mean,
Yeah.
there were. It was kind of like a coating of paint over the mold that was what was
Yeah.
intended.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
and a lot of
I
people
mean,
don't really realize that either. That it
yeah,
was more of a
there's no question that and actually a lot of the terrorism that happened in the 1970s was very much rooted in disrupting the economy of the major Western powers.
well, yeah. If you want to
Uh,
cripple a country, the first thing you hit them in is the
yeah,
money.
yeah,
Buildings can be replaced, whereas economic damage takes forever to compensate for.
sure.
So,
Interesting. You mentioned the buildings. This is where I was going to go next. During the last 20 years, over the last 20 years, there has been a lot of conspiracy theories, I guess I would say. It was an inside job. There were explosives built into the buildings.
the planes were holograms.
Yeah, the planes were holograms. All the people, all the thousands upon thousands of people that witnessed it in New York. And of course, that area has a population of millions, and all the other things going on there. Um, the TV, and one of the reasons why the terrorists picked the World Trade Center in New York was they knew that there would be cameras, that it was a media center of the world, one of the media centers of the world.
Hmm.
It's right up there with Los Angeles and Paris and all the rest of them. So there was going to be cameras trained on those buildings, and they knew that the second plane would have a worldwide audience.
Hmm.
And all for some reason, everybody got that wrong. You do you want to talk a little bit about your opinion about some of the conspiracy theories that have come out of 9/11?
Oh, they're kooky. The only one that I'll really give credence to is why did Tower 7 go down? That's never
Okay.
really been clarified. Um, I don't know. It was said that there were servers or something that had damning evidence or whatever. But other than that, I think my favorite one is probably the one where they rigged the explosives in it. The planes were actually holograms. That
Yeah.
so either or Michael Bay was way ahead of his time, or
Yeah.
it's all BS. But I guess the new recent one is that it was the Jewish space lasers. But I think that one's kind of more in jest.
Okay.
One
All
of our
right.
congresswomen, one of the idiots, was saying that the California wildfires were caused by secret Jewish space lasers, and
Oh
so I
man.
think that one kind of sprung up from that. But and then there's other ones like saying that the government like let it happen, so
Hmm.
that it would give us a reason to invade and take oil, which I mean would be one of the ones that's a little bit more grounded in reality, but I don't really buy
Yeah.
it because again, thousands of people in the government would have known about this, and no one felt guilty and said anything in the
Yeah.
past 20 years. I mean, so what
There's
it
been
was is some unhinged individuals who wanted to disrupt America and in
yeah,
the most fantastic, way they could, and
spectacular way. Yeah.
yeah, and they figured it out.
Yeah, and I gotta tell you, there's been other people who have suggested the same thing about Pearl Harbor, and that our forces knew that it was coming,
Hmm.
but they needed a catalyst to get the American public behind the war. I've never, I've here again, I'm pretty good with World War II. The evidence of that is pretty narrow.
Well,
Uh,
people say that too, but I mean, looking at, of course, Pearl Harbor would be a big target. It was our biggest naval
yeah,
base in the Pacific. I mean, the Japanese would be stupid not to target it if they were eventually to want to say invade California or something. And I mean,
yeah,
honestly, the Trade Center, as you said, being a huge, not only symbol, but, a media outlet, I mean, also makes it a big target. I mean, someone was bound to try to attack it, eventually. And Osama bin Laden did try back in 1993. It wasn't the first time it
yes, he
happened.
did. Sure, yeah.
So,
If you examine that time period, we had our eye off the ball in major ways. If you look at the years leading up to 9/11, we were preoccupied with a president's sexual behavior in the Oval Office.
Which who
And
cares?
and yeah, my only issue with that was he did it with a subordinate. And
Right.
if you had a public job and you were caught with a subordinate, you're out, pension and all. All right. But other than that, I didn't have too much of an issue with it. I don't want to get too far off the track here, but
Right.
high governmental officials having affairs is also a security risk. The Secret Service does not like it.
No.
Monica Lewinsky could have been an operative for a terrorist group for all he knew at that time. So there's a lot of reasons for presidents not to behave that way, but we were way too preoccupied with it. And then we had that goofy election with Bush and Gore. There was the hanging chads down in Florida and that whole election thing there. And all this time, there was static. There was a
Hmm.
lot of static out there that something bad is happening. And we were too worried about all that BS.
Well, and we
And
were kind of
there's
overdue for a
plenty,
major attack.
yeah. And so getting back to the conspiracy theories, it's impossible to refute them because people who come up with these conspiracy theories are only limited by their imagination. They can say, well, what if this, what if that, and what if this, and what if that? And there's just no way to out what if somebody, you know.
Right.
I can tell you some of the ones that is that the steel doesn't melt, at such a temperature in those conditions.
Yeah,
That
thermite
is
doesn't
true.
melt steel beams.
Yeah,
It weakens them.
the thing to remember there is there's a big difference between temperature and heat in regard to potential energy. You can take a torch and have a thin blue flame in a large barn in the middle of wintertime out in Minnesota. And that flame, I don't know how hot it is in terms of temperature, but it's not going to heat up that garage. It's not going to heat up that barn.
Oh yeah,
Same token, you can light a fireplace. It's nowhere near as hot as that torch, but it's going to heat up that area much quicker because there's much more energy being released.
well, again, it
And
boils down to everybody not having a sense of the color gray. Like everything has to be black and white. So
yeah,
because it couldn't melt the steel beams, then therefore it shouldn't have collapsed. So I mean, you have to. There are many other
yeah.
factors. They're not just the one factor, which being heat. I mean, the weight of the building, the wind that
Yeah.
day,
Yeah,
all the
then
other
that's another
things.
thing. There's a lot of things that fuel a fire, and 9/11 had all of them. It had
Hmm.
jet fuel. It had oxygen because those buildings were sliced open. There was wind blowing through there, and
Yep.
there was plenty of other types of fuel. And anything will burn if you get it hot enough. A lot of people don't realize that, but anything will combust if you get it hot enough. And when I'm talking about hot enough, I'm talking about the massive amount of heat energy that was being released when you light a torch onto a steel beam, that the rest of the beam isn't getting hot. The heat coming off of that torch is conducted down that beam. Those
Right.
beams were surrounded with an incredible amount of heat. I mean, I'm not even sure how to describe the energy that was in there. And that type of system too that was in the World Trade Center. One of the problems with building a building that tall is a lot of the structure is a lot of this usable space. The higher you go is taken up by the structure.
Hmm.
So they used the outer and inner skins of that building to have more floor space. They didn't have a typical erector set type of gridding system there.
It's
And
also
then
a
of
good
course,
thing that they didn't have better pilots too, because if they would have hit lower in the tower, it would have killed a lot more people. A
yeah,
lot more would have
yeah,
been incinerated. They wouldn't have had as
they
much
were going
time
too
because it would have
fast, I believe.
collapsed easier. Yeah, something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
Um,
and yeah, there's plenty of reasons, and those buildings were never. Nobody ever imagined that there would be weight coming down on those floors. They only presumed that there would be no more weight than what you could fit on those floors.
mhm.
And of course, that's not true. The structures were designed against going sideways, which is why they didn't fall to the side. Because the big concern with a large flat surface was the eventual hurricane coming in. New
Yep.
York doesn't have them, but you have to be prepared for them. And even if they only happen every 50 years, sooner or later, one was going to come. And it had to have enough strength to stand straight. So the strength was standing straight, not coming down. Nobody ever envisioned that one floor would have to support the floor above it and the floor above it and the floor above it. And that's why they just collapsed straight down.
Well,
And,
modern
and you know,
skyscrapers are also designed to be able to have a little bit of give too, to sway with the
oh,
wind,
sure. Yeah.
so that
Yeah.
supposedly one did get blown over, it won't do as much damage or something like that. I remember reading an article about it a long time ago,
Yeah.
but and it's very true. The taller a building gets, the more effect wind's going to have on it, which is why
Hmm.
you see a couple of those buildings. I think there's one in Dubai,
Dubai.
that has
Yeah.
like that giant like circle like hole in it
Yeah.
to let the wind get through, so it's not pressing on the structure of the building.
Yeah.
So I'm
I
not an
don't know.
engineer though, so
Okay. Before we go, let's tackle one more conspiracy, and it's kind of in the news. It kind of goes along with what we're going to be talking about because, along with 9/11 this week, which is the 20-year anniversary, the other thing that everybody's talking about is the resurgence of COVID. And there's a number of different strains now. And I didn't fully grasp the article that you were talking about, but it has to do. Isn't that drug some sort of a horse?
yeah,
Um, okay,
it's a horse
you want to
dewormer.
talk about what's happening there? Yeah, go ahead.
Well,
This happened in Cincinnati, right? Cincinnati,
yes,
Ohio.
this was down
Okay.
in Butler County. Pretty much what happened was this woman, her husband caught COVID, was on a ventilator for a while, and it's called ivermectin, I think is the name of it, if I'm
Okay.
pronouncing it right. And it's a horse dewormer. It's to take care of parasites, and there are human doses too, that you can get there. Because humans are obviously much smaller than horses. Well, most of them,
Sure.
and what it is just an anti-parasite agent. And someone out there on the internet put out some kind of thing saying that people can kill off the coronavirus if you take a bunch of this horse dewormer. So people have been going nuts and hitting up veterinarians and vet supply stores, trying to buy medication for horses to either proactively stop COVID from happening or kill it. I've seen so many different ways people have used it. Um, but this court case was over. This woman's husband was in ICU on a ventilator for whatever amount of time because refused to get a vaccine and all. And she got a recommendation from some quack doctor saying, well, we should give it to him when it's not going to reverse lung damage or anything. That's why you're on the ventilator after COVID. And she was basically suing the hospital for refusing to give her husband on the ventilator horse medication. And the first court said that the hospital can't refuse something like that, and the second court just said, no, the doctors can have a problem with it. You'll have to go to another hospital if that's what you want as a treatment. Um, but it's just kind of astounding to me that we have this preventative measure that's been you know years in the making that of course was accelerated at the end of its research time, and yet people are going to veterinary offices and drinking bleach and doing every single thing they can to not get a little shot.
Yeah.
uh, so because I mean, I know that every time I start to have anxiety attacks, I go to my local vet and ask for cat tranquilizers, because the internet told me to.
Yeah. I won't take the
but
vaccine, but I'll drink horse piss. Sure.
But yeah, exactly. And my problem too with it as well is, you got these people who, and this is going to sound really callous, but I don't really care anymore. The people who refuse the vaccine and then get sick, really sick off the Delta variant, and then end up taking up hospital beds from people who really need them, like people
Yeah.
who've been gunshots or seniors who've broken their hips. There was a military veteran. Normally, I don't give much credence to the veteran title, but he died of a gallbladder infection. That would have been a 30-minute surgery in and out because he couldn't get a bed in his local hospital because of all these
Yeah.
cases of people refusing to, um, get the vaccine and you wear the mask and prevent this happening in the first place. And I'm kind of the point now where if you've refused the vaccine and it's not a medical reason that you can't have it, then the hospital should just refuse you treatment, just tell you to go
Yeah.
home. Because there are other people out there who need it. I saw a picture of a gunshot victim today who was waiting outside of a hospital to get in because all these beds are taken up by people
Yeah.
who shouldn't or who should have gotten
Well,
it in the first place.
I'm on the fence about that, quite frankly. I mean, you could say the same thing, although these other cases aren't overwhelming hospital beds at the moment, but you could say the same thing about people who don't keep their weight down,
Right.
who engage in smoking and other things, which you know, enormously raise their risk of cancer and heart disease and other things. So I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence about that. It's a little bit of a different category because people with heart disease and cancer and other things aren't overwhelming ERs at the
See,
moment.
that's
You know, like
my argument right there is that this is a
yeah,
preventable thing, that you're overwhelming ER and stopping other people who are dying of things that they couldn't wait to have treated.
yeah,
I mean, your little tantrum about my freedoms and all that is doing active
yeah.
harm to
That I don't
others,
know. No.
and that's why I'm saying, like, it's, and I know a couple people in the medical industry who are basically saying the same thing as me.
Oh
You
yeah, I've
know,
heard it. Sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
and I agree with that. I mean, it's kind of like the argument, like, you get a guy who's addicted to heroin and you've revived him 3 times in one day. I mean, at what point do you just give up? you
Yeah.
know, I mean, it costs a lot of resources for someone who clearly doesn't want to get better
Yeah.
or any of that. So it's a moral and
I
ethical
understand. I
question.
understand that argument, and it's a difficult one. I can tell you that there have been people who have been revived more than once from drug overdoses who have gone on to lead productive lives, and there's a lot of people in this world who have their fathers and their mothers in this world with them because somebody saved them more than once.
Right. Well, I wasn't really
I'm
arguing that we should do that. I
yeah.
was just saying it's kind of a in the
I
similar vein
understand
of
the
argument.
argument. I understand the argument. I understand the viewpoint. It's a very tough thing when any emergency room doctor has been overwhelmed with overdoses, and there's somebody coming in through no fault of their own who have had a heart attack.
Hmm.
You know, the answer is that everybody in as a modus of operandi, everybody's life has value. Everybody should be saved, and I'm all for, by the way, healthcare reform, and that includes social programs and
Hmm.
educational programs to cut down on a lot of these other things. And we roll back those measures all the time. And it always falls on the people who are working at the front door of clinics and emergency rooms and all these other places. So it's a complex issue. I am not, for the most part, too empathetic to anti-vaxxers. The anti-vax movement over the last 20 years has gone off the rails. You know, we have measles on the rise again. We have all these things, and quite frankly, a smallpox. That vaccine has been around over 200 years. I mean, this concept is well understood. You
Can
know,
you imagine people in the 30s and 40s like seeing the future now and seeing people refuse stuff for like polio and all that, who had actually seen what polio does to people?
yeah,
It would blow their
yeah,
minds. Like, we have these little pocket computers that can tell you anything you need to know, but people are refusing to prevent ravaging diseases from having them because someone
yeah,
on Facebook said it's bad for you or something. I mean,
exactly. Sure.
it's. But my thing is, though, with the overwhelming cases, I mean, if someone comes in with a heart attack and you're on a ventilator because you didn't get a vaccine, I wouldn't really have a problem with you getting kicked outside and letting
Yeah,
the person with the heart attack get their
that would
treatment.
be a tough choice, but I couldn't argue with that decision. It is, and of
Is it
course,
right? No.
there's people who would argue out there who would question just how preventable the vaccines are. I mean, I do believe they work. To what degree, you could argue. There's the booster shots coming available now, so that's probably another thing that we're going to have to tackle in the near future here. I believe in September they're going to become available to the wide public. They have been available to people who are compromised in some way. They've been those have been available, but they're going to become widely available soon. So, all right, I don't. All I can tell you is it's crazy times. And in regard to 9/11, quite frankly, 20 years later, Afghanistan is right back where it was. And I'm not going to get into that. I just did a whole commentary podcast about it. But and the craziness with COVID, the division in our country politically, the anti-vaxxers, the pro-vaxxers, um, everybody, the extremes of any argument are much more prevalent than they ever were before. And I believe that's a greater danger to our country, our society than the COVID is or any of these other issues. The division and the bubbles that people live in are probably far more greater than a lot of these other things. And Jack, I'll give you the last word.
Well, I really wish people would look more towards my favorite color, which is gray.
Yeah.
It's always one thing or the other. There's no in between for anything ever
Yes.
anymore, and that's not good.
No.
There's always different factors that come in on things. It's not just one side or the other. Kind of
Yep.
wish why I wish we had a decent third or even fourth party in this country. I mean,
Yep. And of
do a
course,
lot of good
the
toward change.
founding father said, no parties.
Yep.
You're going to have troubles. And
Yeah,
we
that
didn't
lasted,
listen.
didn't it?
All right. Well, Jack, as always, thanks for sitting in. If you're new to the podcast here, first of all, thanks for hanging out with us. We do these live podcasts every once in a while. They're very informal. Jack and I kick around some ideas. We also do a lot of podcasts here. We do authors a lot. We've done a lot of people share their personal journeys. A lot of people have been through a lot of hardships in this world, and I'm very honored that they want to come on this program and talk about them. So do check out our playlist, Billy Dees, on pretty much all of the platforms, just about all of them. You can find the Billy Dees podcast on your favorite podcasting platform. Jack, thanks again for being with us.
Of course, man.
And to our audience, thank you for listening, and we'll be back again next week. Have a great evening.
See ya.